Yesterday was another closed alpha test for 9 to 5, one of the few games I'm really excited to play and feature on this channel in the future. And we could finally preview some of the amazing improvements the team has been working on based on many community feedback and suggestions we had shared during the previous tests, which I believe was the open beta weekend when everyone could participate. In this latest test, we could finally preview the new audio system, the new weapon profiles and animations, weapon balancing, the simplified armor system, and much more. In this video, I will share my impressions and my feedback, which I will also summarize on the official Discord for the devs to read. Overall, I had an amazing time, so much that I didn't really want to play anything else after the test. When the servers finally opened and I connected, I was a bit shocked at first because the new menu was very simplified. There were a lot of things missing, such as the faction selection system, the progression system, the crafting menus, the quest system, and so on. But that was apparently normal because the devs temporarily removed all of those so that we could focus on the important things. So once the devs confirmed that everything will be back in the future and improved, I was breathing again. So let's start with the general gameplay. Some pretty interesting changes were made to the core loop since you no longer face two teams in the last round. The 3v3v3 setup remains the same during the 3 rounds, which probably makes it a lot less confusing and frustrating for both new and experienced players. So all 3 teams share the same objectives, however, the team that won the previous round usually starts closer to the objective location. So while the 2 other teams make and fight their way to the objective, the third one, that won the previous round, has a little bit more time to prepare some defenses. And that's where the game gets really tactical and very interesting to me. However, the objective locations were sometimes quite challenging. The maps were quite often open, and quite often you have to make difficult compromises to build strong defenses, since most places have too many entry points and so on. At first I thought this should be changed, maybe the maps or the objective locations need to be redesigned. But Smoggy and I were able to do proper teamwork and fight against 2 full teams just by using our utilities. When done and utilized properly, your loadouts make a huge difference, and that's why 9 to 5 is a true and proper tactical shooter game to me. There is a feature there that you have to use in your tactics. If not used properly or not at all, you're likely to lose. To me, that's the definition of a proper tactical game. Personally, I really enjoy the new simplified armor system, where basically you still have the 3 different types of body armors, light, medium, and heavy, and that defines your loadouts as well and how many utilities you can use. But there's no more layer of complexity with the different body parts and the different health per body armors and so on. I felt there was too much complexity in the previous systems, where players spent more time playing with the numbers, trying to find the best setup, instead of thinking about their tactics and how their loadouts would work with the rest of the team and how together they could utilize individual loadouts. With the new system, I feel it's easier for players to focus on what matters, loadouts and tactics, and that is what this game is all about in the end. I'm not really interested in a very complex meta like Tarkov where tactics don't really matter anymore, because you know which weapon, armor or bullet types you use to survive no matter how bad your tactic is. Now let's talk about the player versus player, since we are talking a little bit about objectives here. I have to say it still feels like most players do not care or did not care about the objectives at all. Too often, rounds turn into complete manhunts for most players who barely cared about the objectives. I had one match where we were 2 versus 6 because the third player left or couldn't join the match, and we won all 3 rounds just by doing the objectives. The first and the third rounds we had a bit of action, players eventually got closer to the objective, they tried to push it, but we did not see anyone pushing the objective on the second round. So I feel there needs to be more incentives for players to play the objective, otherwise we know exactly how this game will turn. There will be players using the strongest damage meta running around trying to find players to kill, and they won't care about the objective at all. And while that's a valid strategy from time to time, I just think it makes the game not interesting at all, especially if it's a tactical shooter game. Maybe it felt like this because we didn't have a quest system, I don't know, but maybe it would be different if we had something in the future that incentivized players to play the objective a lot more. Now let's talk about the new audio and the animations for the weapons, because a lot of work went into this, and what we got was still a first iteration of what they are doing. It was still work in progress, but honestly, it's like day and night. If you compare the version we played yesterday and the version we played before, is completely different. The game felt so much better than before already. It was easier to pinpoint the location of enemies most of the time. The weapons sounded a lot more satisfying while still having a rather unique profile and something that fits with the context, because the weapons are not really that realistic because it's a different context. But it didn't feel like we were playing with plastic weapons like in previous versions. It felt really good. The 3D audio system also needs a little bit more work though. When enemies came from the right, the left or above, it was pretty clear to me where they were coming from. But I still got confused when enemies were coming from below or behind me. And this is something that still needs to be improved, and I am sure the audio devs will be working a lot more on that. It also was pretty easy to hear players from a far distance, and I am not sure if this is something that needs to be tweaked in the 3D audio system or the level design, or if maybe this is something the devs actually want. But there were times I was able to tell to the rest of my team that I was hearing other players inside a house that was like 25 meters away, and I could even tell that they were in one of the top floors. I think that could be nerfed a bit, unless they want the volume of your footstep to change based on your loadouts, perks, or maybe they want you to move slower. I'm not too sure honestly, but I think that is something they could look into. Let's talk about the balancing a bit. So since we didn't have access to a progression system in this version of the closed alpha, we instead had access to a very basic in-game shop from which we could purchase different armors and different loadouts or weapons using in-game currencies that you could very quickly farm by playing. I was able to try light and medium armors, as well as a couple of new SMGs and a couple of different sniper rifles. So in case you didn't know, in 95 the armors you use from the different factions define your loadouts. So you can go with a light armor with faction A and you're gonna have access to different gadgets compared to a light armor for faction B. In this closed alpha test, I used the light armor to get access to the 3 utility slots, especially the sneak and peek, which was more focused on defensive gadgets and less on offensive or support gadgets. So I went with the smog grenades, the claymore, mines and the automatic turrets, which didn't really feel that powerful compared to how much space is required to deploy it, how easy it is to hack with a drone, and it has a pretty short range as well. Despite all of that, it was a lot of fun to play and combine this loadout with a medium sneak and peek or Mr. Mayhem armor that Smoggy was using, so we could combine our offensive and defensive gadgets pretty well. And that's pretty much how we won most of our games and how we won an entire match, all 3 rounds, without dying against 2 full teams, although we're only 2 in our team. The sniper rifles probably were one of the most powerful weapons, if not the most powerful weapon in this build though, and I have seen a lot of people reporting the same and complaining about it. Too powerful, not enough recoil, too fast, not enough downside, too easy to use. Especially since all 3 members of a team can have one, it probably will get nerfed, and it should in my opinion. And I think they will probably get slower, maybe have a lot less ammo, especially the heavy sniper rifles, because it's too easy for players to spam them without really feeling any consequences. Now a couple of other things that I think need to be improved. The bullet penetration. There were props that bullets did not penetrate properly or easily or at all, or sometimes way too easy, as if there was no collision boxes. And some others, like windows, you couldn't shoot through them. And I think we need some consistency and some realism with that aspect of the game, especially for a competitive tactical shooter game. I'm not sure if it was maybe a bug or maybe something not coded properly on the props, but I really think this could be improved a lot. Throwing grenades was a bit of a nightmare as well, to be honest. First, their collision boxes felt a bit too big, and quite a few times my grenades ended up in the wrong locations because it hit a tiny pixel of a ladder or a box. The physics is a little bit too much in my opinion as well. They tend to bounce all over the place, way too much. So I think grenades need to be a little bit more arcade-ish in the future, a bit heavier, and we definitely need to be able to predict the trajectory of the grenades a lot more, because serious competitive players won't like this kind of randomness when throwing grenades. Grenades need to be reliable because they are utilities and gadgets that are way too important in tactics. Now let's talk a little bit about the graphics. First of all, the new interface felt so much better. More modern, neat, tidy, simple enough, but with the right amount of information on the HUD. The tactical map was pretty cool as well. I don't remember having that in the previous test, but you could basically see it during the selection phase, during the loading phase, and obviously in-game during the match. And during those phases, you could draw waypoints on the map to share basic tactics with your teammates, and that was pretty cool. The new graphics are also really good. The colors feel more new-gen, less washed out, more realistic. It's honestly a lot more pleasant to play, and I think it would satisfy a lot more players now. Personally, I had a few performance issues here and there with, some frame drops on the 1080, which is funny because Smoggy plays on 1070 and actually barely had any issues. So maybe I actually had a problem with my SSD and I will blame my hardware for this time. To conclude, this test felt really good and I really enjoyed most of the improvements the team has made to the game so far. 9 to 5 is honestly going to be one of my favorite tactical shooter games this year, and while it does not have the authenticity of other shooter games I play or that you can find on the market, it definitely is more tactical than most of them. So I hope you enjoyed this summary of my impressions and feedback of the closed alpha test for 9 to 5 that took place on May the 12th, 2021. I had a lot of fun, and yeah, I hope this feedback is going to be useful for the devs who are clearly working really hard to deliver a pretty amazing modern tactical shooter game. I'm Hotrod of the R.O.D.E Foundation. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and to subscribe to support the channel. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.